Jana Duggar's tragic accident. A life lost before birth. With each heartbeat, Jana Duggar could feel the gentle motions of her unborn child. Placing her hand on her stomach, she let herself to be enveloped in the silent delight of expectation. Every little kick served as a reminder of life and hope, a guarantee that something valuable could exist even in a world that is so frail. With her eyes closed, she visualized the future. Holding her child, seeing it develop, hearing its first giggle. She felt a love so intense it nearly pained when she thought about it. With a gentle smile on his face, Stephen Wisseman observed her with affection. He was aware that she was carrying the hopes of a future they had created together in addition to the child. She could feel the warmth of his presence as he reached for her hand. There was no need for words. They had a bond in the silence that was more powerful than words. Anticipation elevated everyday encounters into exceptional ones. Jana meticulously folded small garments and laid out blankets in anticipation of the first night she would hold her infant. Working next to her, Stephen put together furniture, tested monitors, and watched over her constantly, as though his devotion could protect her from any threat. Even in these times, a faint concern persisted. Occasionally, Jana would stop and place her fingers lightly on her stomach while muttering a silent prayer that everything would be all right. Stephen comforted her, telling her that despite the unpredictability of the outside world, they were together and that their love served as a shield. However, they were both aware that life may change suddenly. Jana made the decision to run a brief errand one day. She laughed and said it was okay, but Stephen insisted on accompanying her because he was worried about the drive. After they got into the automobile, things appeared to be quiet for a while. Stephen moved across to take Jana's hand as she tapped the driving wheel and murmured a gentle melody. Silently, they discussed the baby, their dreams, and the life they envisioned, a world free from chaos or terror. The world outside was moving in its typical rhythm as they drove, the sunshine dancing on the road. The air was filled with distant laughing, rustling leaves, and children playing. Whispered hopes mixed with laughter inside the automobile. They permitted themselves to think that the world would remain tranquil. Then, out of nowhere, an automobile came into view, swift and unexpected. Jana tried to react, but her heart leaped. Time appeared to stretch in ways that were inconceivable, but Stephen's voice sounded a clear warning. Their world was ripped apart by the powerful shock that occurred in an instant, with glass breaking and metal grinding. Jana protected her belly out of instinct. Desperate to keep her and the life developing inside her safe, Stephen pulled her close. Broken and twisted, the automobile came to a stop. Suffocating silence descended. They were both still alive, but everything was different. Jana's hands were shaking and her heart was racing. Stephen's face was pale, and his breathing was shallow. In a single instant, their plans, their hopes, and their envisioned future were all destroyed. And in a way neither of them could have predicted, the life that had represented love and hope inside Jana was now clinging to the thinnest of threads, the frailty of life exposed. The impact felt like it went on forever. As the car twisted violently, Jana's fists grasped the steering wheel. The sound of the metal and glass meeting would haunt them both for the rest of their lives. Every shock echoed through her body, and every tire scream and metal crunch seemed unnaturally loud. Even as anxiety ripped through him, Stephen tried to console her by holding her close while his arms trembled, and he called her name. The delicate life Jana had cultivated for months was exposed to the violence all around them, and she could feel the force pressing against her belly. Tears burned her eyes and a searing ache jolted through her body. But she was only focused on the child she was carrying and the life she had imagined. How could something so commonplace, a simple drive, become this? Her head was filled with incomprehensible questions. Then there was quiet. The automobile twisted and became unrecognizable when it came to a hard stop. Only the two of them, hurt and shaken, were left in an intolerable silence as the outside world seemed to freeze. Breathing quickly and shallowly, Jana's chest heaved as each breath served as a stark reminder of how close they had been to losing everything. Sweat and blood mixed on Stephen's pallid face as he attempted to comprehend the abrupt destruction. Jana's mind was divided between the small creature inside of her and her own suffering. She sensed the faint lack of movement, the flutter to which she had been so sensitive suddenly eerily silent. She could hardly control the tidal wave of fear that swept through her chest in panic. Stephen's hold tightened, and he repeatedly muttered her name, but his own voice was as terrified as she was. The minutes seemed to go on forever. Each heartbeat was audible in the deafening silence as they were caught in the aftermath. Jana put her hands to her stomach once more, hoping that the life inside would react and let her know that it was still there. However, optimism felt more brittle with each second that went by, seeping through anxious fingers like sand. When assistance did come, it was excruciatingly slow and extraordinary. Responders moved around them with a practiced eagerness, working swiftly with hands that were effective but far away. After being raised and strapped, Jana's body was taken into the sterile, clinical setting of a hospital. Stephen trailed behind, his arm feigning weakness as his thoughts reenacted every harrowing scene, every shock, every scream. Although the hospital's medical staff acted precisely, the concern was evident. As they attempted to stabilize her, Jana held on to Stephen's hand. One intolerable reality emerged from the agony, the uncertainty, and the crushing fear. The baby, the child she had borne with such love, was in danger. Hours seemed to drag for forever. Every time the monitors beeped or the physicians muttered an update, Jana's heart wrenched. Even as her greatest fears grew closer, Stephen never left her side, his palm covering hers, stabilizing her, and giving her the strength to persevere. They mumbled apologies for a world that had been so terrible in one instant, spoke in kind tones, and made pledges of strength and love. Then the time of indescribable sorrow arrived. Jana sensed a change, a silence that was more than anguish. It was the loss of the flutter she had experienced, the life she had defended. She had lost the child she had longed for, dreamed about, and carried with unshakable love. The anguish left them both feeling hollow and shaky, and the grief was unrelenting and intense, like a tidal wave. As she sobbed, Stephen embraced her, as though his arms were the only thing that could protect them from the gravity of what had transpired. They wept not only for the child's passing, but also over the destruction of the future they had dreamed of and the innocence of life lost before it could blossom. There was a tenuous bond between them, a wordless pledge. Even in the midst of suffering, they made it out alive. They had one another. There was also a spark, fragile, shaky, but unbroken, that hinted of the life that lay ahead, of the love that could withstand even this unfathomable loss, even as the weight of sadness threatened to swallow them whole. Grief and recovery in hospitals. The quiet, sterile buzz of the hospital greeted Jana when she awoke, the subtle beep of monitors serving as a continual reminder of how fleeting life is. Every movement she made brought back vivid memories of the collision, but the underlying sorrow was not physical. The void where her child had been was thick and oppressive, living inside her chest. Recalling the small life that had existed, she put a quivering hand to her stomach and felt the emptiness as a physical pain. Stephen sat next to her and held her hand in a desperate yet protective manner. His own body was bruised, each aching serving as a reminder that they had barely survived the accident. But it was the loss, not his wounds, that engulfed him. In an instant, the plans, the laughing, the little moments of anticipation, and the aspirations they had stitched together were all gone. Jana felt cut off from the outside world as the nurses walked around them with trained speed, checking vitals, adjusting monitors, and giving out medications. Her eyes strayed to Stephen's hand, the sole link to a world she could live with. She held on to that voice like a lifeline in a sea of hopelessness as he quietly muttered her name, pleading with her to breathe, to relax, to live. The hours merged into a mist. They were kept apart from visitors, allowing them to grieve in peace and quiet. Every drop of Jana's uncontrollably flowing tears was evidence of the love she had lost and carried. Stephen sat silently, occasionally stroking her hair, and other times resting his head against hers, allowing the quiet to speak for them both. They mentioned their child in flashes of insight. They pictured the laughing they would have heard, the small hands they would have held, and what life would have been like. To commemorate what they had loved, it was vital to talk even though each recollection could have sliced through the air like a dagger. They were lengthy days. Although Jana's body started to mend, her heart remained raw and sensitive to every sound and every possibility. Stephen was there all the while, his sorrow intertwined with hers. He grieved in silence, letting the tears flow in private at times, and letting them spill out when he held her in the stillness of the night. Despite their inability to comprehend why it had occurred and how cruel life might be, they clung to one another. They found a new reality in the hospital room. Amid the constant ticking of the clock and the stench of antiseptic, love could survive suffering, but it could not make it go away, and survival was not victory. Stephen's voice, his hand, and the silent comfort of their companionship provided Jana with little moments of comfort. They apologized to the child they had lost and to each other in hushed tones, words that were important to express, but could never undo what had happened. Every remark, sigh, and tear was a strand in the fabric of their mutual sorrow, a tenuous link to the past and the future. There were glimmerings of hope even in the midst of the gloom. Beyond this suffering, Jana envisioned a world in which love and grief could coexist, and loss might become a part of their story without completely defining it. Stephen clung to that hope with the same ferocity as he did to her, both of them realizing that surviving was the first step, and that healing would not be instantaneous or total. Their suffering was contained within the hospital walls, but so was their solidarity. They started to settle into a cadence in the silence, a precarious equilibrium between breathing and grieving, between remembering and letting go. Although it wasn't enough to make the sorrow go away, it was the start of perseverance and the first step toward a future that might still exist despite being irrevocably changed. Reflection and emotional recovery. Weeks passed, and the calmer, kinder rhythms of home took the place of the hospital's sterile odor. Nothing felt the same when Jana and Stephen got back to their home. Once brimming with anticipation and promise, the walls now appeared to reverberate with the child's absence. They were reminded of dreams ruthlessly interrupted in each chamber. Moving slowly, still in pain from the accident, Jana carried physical scars on her body, but the invisible ones that burdened her heart were much more powerful. As she moved through the nursery, she touched the small garments and folded them with shaking hands while sobbing uncontrollably. Every memory evoked a keen pain of loss, and every detail served as a reminder of what might have been. Stephen was a calm anchor in the storm, a steady, patient presence that never wavered. He offered assistance where he could, but for the most part he just held her, listened, and let her cry silently because he knew that nothing could make her feel any less empty. At times, they honored what they had held in their hearts by speaking quietly to the child they had lost and murmuring love into the silence. Their sorrow was not a straight line. There were days of weeping and stillness, days that were painful and intolerable. On other days, the sun appeared to break through the shadows and provide brief but brittle moments of tranquility. As they realized that they needed to survive together, both physically and emotionally, they clung to one another. Jana frequently caught herself thinking about the life she could have led. She pictured little turning points like the child's first giggle, first step, or voice calling her name. Every imagined scenario served as a bittersweet reminder of the intensity of her love, bringing both comfort and sadness. The same things were silently envisioned by Stephen as well, who kept those recollections in the back of his mind and shared the unsaid sorrow that united them. They started looking for little remembrance rites. Every evening, a small candle was lighted, a gentle melody played in the silence, and they spent time introspecting in the garden while the sun warmed their faces. These little deeds turned become pillars, providing a means of processing their loss without becoming totally overwhelmed by it. They learned the strength of human connection through the suffering. Their mutual grief strengthened their bond beyond anything they had ever experienced, proving that love is resilient even in the face of adversity. They frequently talked about hope, not forgetting or erasing the loss, but figuring out how to acknowledge it, live with it, and keep going. Gradually, hesitant healing steps started. Jana gave herself permission to once more find joy in the little things in life, to chuckle quietly when Stephen joked, and to appreciate the beauty of their surroundings. She handled her loss and her hope with quiet dignity, and Stephen was impressed by her bravery and found strength in it. They started to embrace that life, despite its imperfections, gave moments of beauty and connection, even though the loss of their child was a wound that would never completely heal. Together, they discovered that love could last even when the future they had dreamed of was taken away from them, and that grieving could coexist with life. As they held hands and shared recollections in the stillness of the evenings, They realized the harsh reality that although life would never be the same, their tragedy-fortified relationship would be able to support them through whatever lay ahead. Going ahead and a bittersweet resolution. Despite the suffering that Jana and Steven were carrying, time went on. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months, each leaving visible and invisible scars. The tranquil rhythm of their home gradually returned, but their child's absence persisted as a silent presence in every nook and cranny. Jana discovered how to carefully balance grief and perseverance as she went through her days. Knowing that every cry was a witness to the love she had borne, she allowed herself to feel the sadness as she caressed the small garments and the unspoiled nursery. Their hearts were connected by love, loss, and the unsaid promises that only they could comprehend. And Steven was always close by, steadfast and unflinching, sharing her burden without using words. They discovered methods to pay tribute to the lost child. In the garden, a little tree was planted as a living reminder of a life that had lived, if fleetingly. Every evening, people would gather around it and talk, sometimes quietly, sometimes with heavy emotional voices, sometimes reciting words of remembering. It served as a therapeutic ritual, a means of acknowledging the emptiness without letting it completely devour them. There were fleeting moments of joy even in the midst of the deepest sadness. They depended on one another's strength, shared tender touches, and giggled softly over memories. In addition to shattering their expectations, the catastrophe had shown them a level of fortitude they had never experienced before. The ability to persevere, to feel intensely, and to love in spite of suffering. Jana frequently reflected on the child they had lost, envisioning a future that would never come to pass, but she took solace in the knowledge that their love had been genuine, deep, and enduring. Steven shared this sentiment, silently savoring the recollection of the life that had momentarily shared their space, and served as a reminder of how fleeting and valuable life is. They looked forward together, cautiously hopeful. They realized that forgetting was not a necessary part of healing. It did not imply that there was no sadness. However, it did entail persevering, surviving, and letting love lead them through the darkness. Every day turned into a tiny but meaningful step toward a future molded by what they had left, not by what they had lost, but by what they still had. One other, their love, and the unbreakable tie created in both happiness and sorrow. Jana and Steven were at peace in the tranquility of the evening as they held hands under the last of the sun. Even while life will never be the same, it might still be beautiful. There was yet hope for love. They learned a bittersweet lesson from their perseverance. Tragedy had taken a lot, but it could never erase the depth of their shared experiences, the strength they had found in one another, or the memory of the life they had loved so intensely, even if only momentarily.